He raised his glass and smiled at me. Here's to Emma, still figuring life out. People laughed. Not cruel. Just easy. Like it was harmless. I felt every pair of eyes shift. Some sympathetic. Some curious. A few pretending not to look at all. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The room smelled like champagne and peonies and expensive perfume. My brother's wedding. 200 guests. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet in the corner pretending this was charming. And me. Still figuring life out. He kept going. Not all of us can peak early, he said. Some of us take the scenic route. More laughter. I don't remember swallowing. I don't remember blinking. I just remember the way my name sounded in his mouth. Like a footnote. Like a cautionary tale. Hi. I'm Emma. I didn't think I'd ever say this out loud. I'm 23. I live in a small apartment with uneven floors and a fridge that hums too loudly at night. I work part-time at a bookstore. I haven't finished college. I don't have a 5-year plan. Apparently, that makes me the punchline. My brother, Ryan, is 31. Corporate attorney. Sharp suits. Firm handshake. The kind of smile that shows up in LinkedIn profile pictures. He was marrying Charlotte. Charlotte with the perfect posture. Charlotte with the polite laugh. Charlotte whose parents donated an entire wing to a hospital somewhere. I was genuinely happy for him. I think I was. I bought my dress on sale 3 weeks earlier. Navy. Simple. I stood in front of the mirror that morning and told myself I looked grown. I wanted to look grown. When Ryan asked me to sit at the head table, I thought it meant something. That maybe he still saw me as part of his world. But when he stood up for his toast, I should have known. He didn't look nervous. He looked amused. And that's the part that stung. If he'd been drunk, it would have been easier. If he'd been angry. If there had been some edge to it. But it was playful. That soft condescending kind of playful. Our Emma, he said. Proof that life doesn't have a deadline. Or direction. Someone near the back choked on laughter. My mom shifted in her seat. I saw it. Just a small movement. A tiny tightening of her lips. But she didn't interrupt. No one did. I felt my cheeks heat up. My ears too. I tried to smile. You know that smile? The one that stretches but doesn't quite reach your eyes? The one that says, I'm in on the joke. I promise. Except I wasn't. I was trying to remember when I'd become the family example. The almost. The not yet. The still working on it. Ryan lifted his glass again. To Charlotte, who somehow believes in potential. Even when it's hypothetical. More laughter. That one landed differently. Charlotte touched his arm lightly. Like, okay, that's enough. But she was smiling too. And then. He added something I don't think he meant to sound cruel. At least Emma doesn't have to worry about prenups. It passed quickly. Almost too quickly. People chuckled again. It blended into the noise. But something about the way Charlotte's father's expression changed. Just for a second. Like he hadn't expected that line. Like there was context I didn't have. And that's when the humiliation started to shift into something else. Because it wasn't just a joke anymore. It felt loud. Intentional. And I suddenly had this awful, creeping feeling. That I wasn't just being teased. I was being positioned. As the safe comparison. As the girl with nothing to protect. I stared down at my wine glass. And I thought. Why would he say that? Not the joke. The prenup part. Why bring that up in front of everyone? Unless. No. I told myself I was overthinking it. I've always done that. But the way Charlotte's mother leaned toward her husband and whispered something. The way Ryan avoided looking directly at me after that line. The way my own name felt smaller somehow. It stayed with me. The music resumed. People clapped. Dinner continued. But the air felt different. At least for me. And I couldn't shake the feeling. That I had just been reduced to a lesson. Ryan has always been impressive. That's the word people use. Even when we were kids. He was the one teachers remembered. The one neighbors bragged about. The one who won debate tournaments and shook hands like he was already practicing for something bigger. I was quieter. Not invisible. Just softer around the edges. I liked books. Long walks. Writing half-finished journal entries I never showed anyone. I did well in school, but not in the shiny way Ryan did. Mine was steady. His was spectacular. Our parents never said they compared us. But comparisons don't have to be spoken out loud to exist. At family dinners, it was always, Ryan's firm just landed a major client. Or, Ryan's buying a condo downtown. Or, Ryan's flying to Boston for a conference. When it was my turn, it was usually, Emma's still exploring. Exploring. That word followed me for years. At first it sounded adventurous. Free. Like I was choosing something bold. Then it started to sound unfinished. I left college during my junior year. Not dramatically. Not in a rebellious way. I just burned out. I couldn't focus. My anxiety got loud. Too loud. And I told myself I'd take one semester off. One semester turned into two. Then a job at the bookstore turned into something comfortable. Familiar. Safe. I told everyone I'd go back. I believed it. I think I still do. Ryan didn't say much when I dropped out. He just nodded once and said, "Just don't drift." I didn't know what that meant at the time. Maybe I still don't. But sometimes I think drifting is just another word for surviving quietly. Charlotte came into Ryan's life about 2 years ago. We met her at Thanksgiving. She brought a homemade pie and a carefully chosen wine. She complimented my mom's table settings and asked my dad about his old Navy stories like she'd studied them beforehand. She wasn't fake. At least, I don't think she was. She was just polished. And she and Ryan made sense together. They spoke the same language. Investment portfolios. Real estate. Networking events. Equity. That word came up a lot. I remember one night, maybe 6 months before the wedding, we were all at my parents' house again. The engagement had just been announced. Ryan and Charlotte were sitting across from me on the couch, talking logistics. Venues. Guest lists. Contracts. Charlotte mentioned something about making sure everything's protected. Ryan laughed lightly. "Yeah, my firm handles those all the time." I didn't think much of it. But I noticed how her dad, who had joined us that evening, listened very carefully whenever finances came up. He was a quiet man. Observant. The kind who doesn't speak unless he's certain. And when Ryan said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," Charlotte's dad just gave a slow nod. That was probably the first red flag. Not that anyone argued. It was the opposite. It was too smooth. Too agreed upon. Like decisions were being made in rooms I wasn't invited into. Which is normal, right? I mean, I'm the younger sister. I'm not supposed to be in on legal agreements and property discussions. Still. There were small comments that started to stack up. Ryan once joked at dinner, "Charlotte's dad thinks I'd run off with the silverware." Charlotte smiled tightly. "He's just cautious." Ryan shrugged. "Good thing I'm marrying into assets." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But something about that word, assets, made my stomach tighten. It wasn't romantic. It was transactional. And I guess I should have noticed how often money floated through their conversations. Not greedily. Just, strategically. I didn't feel judged by Charlotte exactly. But sometimes she'd ask me gentle questions that felt heavier than they sounded. "So what's next for you, Emma? Are you saving for anything specific? Do you ever think about grad school?" Her tone was kind. But I always felt like I was being assessed. I started dressing a little more carefully around them. Speaking more clearly. As if I had something to prove. Which is strange. Because I never thought I cared that much. Maybe I did. Maybe I wanted Ryan to see me as more than the unfinished project. There was one night, about a month before the wedding, when Ryan and I ended up alone in my parents' kitchen. He was pouring himself a drink. He looked relaxed. "Big year for you," I said. He smirked. "Big life." There was something in his tone. Something sharp. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "About what?" "Marriage." He paused. "Emma, marriage isn't about nerves. It's about security." Security. He said it like it was obvious. Like that was the whole point. And then he added, almost casually, "You'll understand when you have something to protect." I remember laughing awkwardly. but it didn't feel like a joke. I don't know, maybe you felt that too. That moment when someone says something small, and it lands bigger than it should. I drove home that night with the radio off. Just thinking. About security. About protection. About what I apparently didn't have. And by the time the wedding came around, I had already started shrinking a little around them. I didn't notice it consciously. But I did. I sat up straighter. Spoke less. Smiled more. Trying to be acceptable. So when Ryan made that toast. When he turned my life into a light-hearted comparison. When he brought up prenups in a room full of people who clearly understood the subtext better than I did. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Maybe the signs had been there all along. I just didn't know yet what they were pointing toward. The morning after the wedding, I woke up with a headache that wasn't from wine. It was the kind that sits behind your eyes. Heavy. Persistent. Like your brain is trying to replay something you missed. I kept hearing that line again. At least Emma doesn't have to worry about prenups. It was tossed out so casually. But it didn't feel casual anymore. I tried to shake it off. Weddings are weird. People say things. Maybe I was being sensitive. I've always been prone to reading between lines that aren't there. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Charlotte's father had looked at Ryan right after that comment. Not offended. Not amused. Just alert. Like something had slipped. 3 days later, my mom called me. Her voice was too bright. "You coming for Sunday dinner?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." She hesitated. "Charlotte and Ryan will be there." That shouldn't have mattered. But my stomach tightened anyway. Sunday dinners have always been our thing. No matter how busy Ryan got, he showed up. Even if it was just for an hour. I went. I wore the same navy dress, actually. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. When I walked in, Charlotte was already in the kitchen with my mom. They were talking quietly. Ryan was at the dining table with Charlotte's dad. Paperwork was spread out between them. Not neatly stacked. Open. Highlighted. I froze for a second. Ryan looked up first. He said. Too casual. Charlotte's dad glanced at me, then calmly slid one of the pages face down. That tiny movement. It was subtle. But it was deliberate. I told myself not to react. I hung up my coat. Kissed my mom on the cheek. Made a comment about the weather. Normal things. But I kept noticing how the papers didn't get put away. They stayed there. Like I wasn't supposed to be bothered by them. Like I wasn't supposed to notice. At dinner, conversation felt careful. Charlotte talked about their honeymoon plans. Italy. Lake Como. A private villa. Ryan described it like he'd already memoized every square foot. I smiled and asked polite questions. Then, halfway through dessert, Charlotte's dad cleared his throat. "We finalized everything yesterday," he said. Ryan nodded. "Everything?" my mom asked lightly. "The agreement," Charlotte's dad replied. There it was. Agreement. Not wedding. Not honeymoon. Agreement. Ryan picked up his wine glass. Standard stuff. Charlotte didn't speak. I looked at her. She avoided my eyes. I don't know why I asked what I asked next. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. But I heard myself say, like a prenup. The room shifted. Just slightly. Ryan's jaw tightened for a second before he forced a smile. Yeah. Pretty comprehensive. Comprehensive. That word again. Charlotte's dad leaned back in his chair. It's just smart. Especially when families have built significant foundations. I felt my face warm. Right, I said. I didn't know what I was reacting to yet. Just that something felt off. Ryan looked at me across the table. You don't have to look so serious, Em. It's not that dramatic. I blinked. I'm not. He smirked a little. Relax. It's not like anyone's expecting you to draft one anytime soon. The joke landed softer this time. But it landed. And I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just about protection. It was about hierarchy. I was below the line. Below the assets. Below the risk. Below the need for protection. I excused myself to the bathroom after dinner. I stood there staring at my reflection. Trying to figure out why this bothered me so much. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their contracts. I just didn't like feeling like I was the baseline example of someone with nothing to lose. Or nothing worth protecting. When I came back out, Ryan and Charlotte were saying goodbye. Charlotte hugged me. A little too quickly. "You're quiet," she said softly. "I'm fine." She hesitated. Then she added, "It's just paperwork, Emma." Paperwork. That word again. As if paperwork doesn't define futures. As if paperwork doesn't decide who walks away with what. As if paperwork doesn't quietly outline who holds power. Later that night, my mom texted me, "Don't overthink it." Which was interesting. Because I hadn't told her I was. That's when the unease shifted into something sharper. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. Because if everyone kept telling me it was nothing, then why did it feel like something? And why did I suddenly feel like I was standing outside a glass door, watching decisions about worth happen on the other side? I didn't know what I was missing yet. But I could feel it. And I had this awful sense. That the prenup wasn't just about Charlotte protecting herself. It was about Ryan proving something. And somehow, I was part of that proof. I wish I could say I found out in some dramatic way. An envelope. A confrontation. A secret email. It wasn't like that. It was smaller. Quieter. And somehow worse. About a week after that Sunday dinner, Charlotte texted me. Just me. "Hey. Coffee sometime?" I stared at the message longer than I should have. We'd never met one-on-one before. Not really. Always in groups. Family settings. Structured spaces. I typed, deleted, typed again. Sure. We met at a cafe near her office. One of those minimalist places with exposed brick and drinks that cost more than my hourly wage. She looked composed. Perfectly put together. Like always. But her smile was thinner. After small talk that didn't quite land, she said, "I didn't love the wedding toast." I blinked. "You mean, about me?" She nodded. I told him it wasn't necessary. That surprised me. I hadn't expected her to acknowledge it. "It's fine," I said automatically. It wasn't. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "My dad was upset," she added quietly. "Why?" I asked. She hesitated. And for a second, I thought she might actually say something honest. He felt like it made things public. Public? What things? I asked. Another pause. Then she looked at me in a way that felt almost apologetic. "The prenup isn't just about money," she said. I didn't interrupt. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "There's a clause. About family obligations." The air felt suddenly heavier. "What does that mean?" She swallowed. "It means if Ryan ever financially supports a direct family member beyond a certain amount, it gets deducted from his share in a separation." I stared at her. I'm not great with legal language. So it took me a second. "You mean, like helping our parents?" "Yes," she said. "Or," I started, but I already knew. "Or you." The word hung between us. I felt something inside me go very still. Why would that matter? I asked. She looked uncomfortable now. It was my dad's request. Given uncertainty. Uncertainty. About what? She didn't answer right away. "Emma," she said softly, "you've had some instability. Career-wise. It's just precautionary." Precautionary. I felt my chest tighten. "So there's a clause," I said slowly, "that penalizes Ryan if he ever helps me financially." Charlotte looked down at her cup. "It's not phrased like that. But that's what it is." Silence. The cafe noise around us felt distant. Muffled. "I didn't think you'd find out," she admitted. Find out. Like it was a secret. Like I was the variable. Like I was the risk. "I'm not planning on asking Ryan for money," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "It's not personal." But it was. It was entirely personal. It was my name, even if it wasn't written explicitly. It was my drifting. My unfinished degree. My part-time job. My uneven apartment floors. All quantified. All assessed. All categorized as potential liability. I don't think I cried. I didn't yell. I just felt hollow. Like something inside me had quietly folded in on itself. Because suddenly, every joke made sense. Every comment about protection. Every don't drift. Every little smile. They weren't just teasing me. They had evaluated me. And concluded I was a future expense. I walked home instead of taking the bus. It was colder than I expected. I kept replaying Charlotte's tone. It's just precautionary. Like I was a storm they were boarding up against. I thought about Ryan signing that document. Reading that clause. Seeing the implication. And agreeing. That was the part that hurt. Not Charlotte's dad. Not the money. Ryan. My brother. Who used to sneak me snacks after bedtime. Who used to tell people I was the smartest person he knew when we were kids. He read a legal document that essentially said, Emma might need saving. And he signed it. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought siblings were exempt from being evaluated. Maybe I thought love overrode contracts. But contracts are cold. And they don't care about childhood memories. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor. The fridge humming too loud again. And I stared at my bank app. Not because I needed money. But because I needed to see numbers. To reassure myself I wasn't what they thought I was. My savings weren't huge. But they weren't empty. I paid my own rent. My own bills. I'd never asked Ryan for anything. Not once. And yet, in their future, in their careful planning, I was already positioned as someone who might. That's when something inside me didn't break. It just went quiet. Like a switch flipped. I stopped feeling embarrassed. Stopped feeling small. And started feeling something else. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Because if they were allowed to define me in a contract, then maybe I needed to start defining myself somewhere else. I just didn't know how. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be someone's hypothetical liability. For a few days after the coffee with Charlotte, I didn't do anything. Which sounds dramatic, but I mean it literally. I went to work. I shelved books. I rang up customers. I smiled when people made jokes about how real jobs were dying. I came home. I made pasta. I sat on my couch. And inside, something was rearranging itself. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't empowering. It was methodical. I kept replaying Charlotte's exact words. Beyond a certain amount. There was a number attached to me. Some threshold where I became expensive. That part stuck. Because if there was a number that defined risk, then numbers could also define strength. I pulled out an old notebook one night. The kind I usually use for half-written thoughts. Instead of feelings, I wrote figures. My rent. Utilities. Groceries. Savings. What I would need if I went back to school. What I would need if I moved. I didn't know what I was planning yet. I just knew I didn't want to ever feel like someone's claws again. It's strange how humiliation can do that. It can either shrink you, or it can make you quiet enough to think clearly. I stopped talking about it with my mom. She'd already said, don't overthink it, and I could tell she wanted peace more than truth. I didn't confront Ryan either. Not immediately. I thought about it. I imagined saying, did you really sign something that treats me like a liability? But every version of that conversation ended with him explaining it logically. Telling me I was emotional. Telling me it wasn't personal. And I wasn't ready to hear that. Instead, I did something that felt small but significant. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor. Not a big firm. Just a woman named Lisa who worked out of a modest office near the bookstore. I almost cancelled. Sitting in that waiting room felt embarrassing. Like I was pretending to be someone more serious than I was. But when I sat across from her and she asked, what brings you in? I didn't mention Ryan. I said, I want to know where I stand. And that was honest. We talked for an hour. She didn't look at me like I was behind. She didn't ask why I hadn't finished college. She just asked what I wanted. That question startled me. Because I'd been so busy reacting to how I was perceived. I hadn't asked myself that in a while. What do I want? Not what do I need to prove. Not how do I avoid being a burden. What do I actually want? I told her I wanted stability. Not flashy stability. Just control. She helped me outline a path back to school that wouldn't drown me in debt. Part-time classes. Grants I didn't know I qualified for. A timeline that was realistic. When I walked out of her office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And that was new. I also did something else. Something I debated for 3 nights straight. I emailed Ryan. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just direct. Can we talk? Just us. He responded quickly. Sure. Everything okay? I almost wrote, define okay. Instead I said, just want to clear the air. We met at a bar near his office. He looked the same as always. Polished. Relaxed. Still thinking about the wedding? He asked with a half smile. I took a breath. Why did you agree to that clause? He didn't pretend not to understand. He leaned back. It's standard, he said. It's not, I replied quietly. Not that part. He studied me. It's precautionary, he repeated. That's what Charlotte said. He sighed. It's not about you personally. It's about patterns. You've been figuring things out. There it was again. Figuring. And that makes me a risk. I asked. He hesitated just long enough. It makes you unpredictable. Unpredictable. I let that sit between us. I've never asked you for money, I said. I know. Then why assume I would? He rubbed his jaw. Because family helps family. And I didn't want that help to become complicated. Complicated. I felt something shift inside me. Not hurt this time. Understanding. He wasn't afraid I'd fail. He was afraid he'd feel obligated. And that obligation would cost him. I'm not your obligation, I said. He looked almost defensive. I didn't say you were. You signed something that says I might be. Silence. The bar noise filled the gap. For the first time, I didn't feel smaller than him. I didn't feel behind. I just felt clear. I'm not asking you to change it, I said. I just needed to know where I stood. He looked confused. You're my sister. That's not what I meant. I finished my drink. Stood up. I won't ever put you in a position where you have to choose between me and a contract. He frowned. Emma, that's dramatic. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I still don't know. But as I walked out of that bar, I realized something important. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his protection. And I definitely didn't want to be the quiet comparison at someone else's wedding. I wanted independence so solid that no one could quietly write me into a risk category again. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself, undefined. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't drifting. I was choosing. 3 months later, my parents hosted another dinner. Smaller this time. Just immediate family. Ryan and Charlotte had just come back from Italy. They looked sun-kissed. Relaxed. Expensive. I almost didn't go. But I had something in my bag. And I was tired of carrying it alone. Dinner was normal at first. Pasta. Wine. Stories about Lake Como. Ryan described the villa again. The view. The privacy. Privacy. That word almost made me smile. Halfway through the meal, my dad asked me, casually, So any updates? Still at the bookstore? I felt it. That familiar pause before everyone looks at me. The soft expectation of vagueness. I swallowed. Actually, I said, I enrolled back in school. My mom blinked. You did? Yeah. Part-time. Starting next semester. Ryan nodded slowly. That's good. Good. I kept going. I also met with a financial advisor. Mapped out a plan. Charlotte's eyebrows lifted slightly. What kind of plan? She asked. I opened my bag. My hands were steady. I hadn't planned to do it like this. Not exactly. But the moment felt right. I put together a summary, I said. I slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. Not a dramatic stack. Just 1 page. Numbers. Savings projections. Tuition breakdown. A timeline. No emotion. Just facts. Ryan looked at it first. Then Charlotte. Then her dad, who had stopped eating. What is this? Ryan asked. It's what I stand on, I said. The room went very quiet. I calculated everything, I continued. Even worst-case scenarios. I won't need help. From anyone. My mom looked confused. Emma, no one said you would. I glanced at Ryan. He knew. Charlotte's dad cleared his throat. This isn't necessary. Maybe it isn't, I said. Maybe I shouldn't have done it. Maybe it was petty. I still don't know. But I needed them to see numbers instead of assumptions. Ryan folded the paper once. Slowly. You think we see you as a charity case? He asked. I think you protected yourself from a version of me that doesn't exist. His jaw tightened. It was standard legal language. It was specific enough to include family support, I replied. Charlotte finally spoke. Emma, the clause isn't even triggered unless. Unless what? I asked. Unless financial contributions exceed a threshold. There's that word again. Threshold. Risk. Limit. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was just stating. I've never asked you for money, I said to Ryan. I know. Then why was I part of the equation? He looked frustrated now. Because life changes. People need things. I didn't want to resent you if that ever happened. That one hit. Not loud. But deep. Resent. So you preemptively protected yourself from resenting me, I said quietly. Silence. My dad shifted in his seat. My mom looked like she wanted to stop this. But I wasn't yelling. I wasn't attacking. I was just clarifying. I don't want to be your hypothetical burden, I said. And I won't be. Ryan stood up. That startled everyone. You're making this bigger than it is, he said. Am I? I asked. I genuinely didn't know. Maybe I was. Maybe I should have just let it go. But I remembered the wedding toast. The laughter. The word prenup drifting through crystal chandeliers. And I remembered sitting on my kitchen floor staring at my bank app like it was proof of worth. I'm not asking you to change anything, I said. I just needed you to understand that I understand. Charlotte's dad finally spoke. You're young, he said. Ambition fluctuates. I looked at him. I'm not fluctuating, I replied. That was the first time I heard my voice sound solid. Ryan exhaled sharply. This is exhausting, he muttered. That hurt more than the clause. Exhausting. Like my existence was paperwork. I picked up the single sheet from the table. Folded it neatly. You won't have to worry about me, I said. And then I did something I've never done before. I left first. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. Just my coat. My keys. The night air outside was cold. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, heart pounding. Maybe I shouldn't have done it. Maybe I made it awkward forever. But for the first time, I didn't feel like the comparison. I didn't feel like the risk. I felt defined. And even though my hands started shaking once I got into my car, they weren't shaking from humiliation. They were shaking from release. The week after that dinner was quiet. No dramatic fallout. No angry phone calls. Which almost made it worse. I kept expecting something. A text from Ryan telling me I'd overstepped. A long message from Charlotte explaining legal nuance. My mom asking why I couldn't just let things be. Instead, there was space. And space can be loud. I went to work like usual. Shelved new arrivals. Recommended novels to strangers who didn't know anything about prenup clauses or thresholds or hypothetical burdens. It felt grounding. Ordinary. About 4 days later, my mom called. Her voice was softer this time. Are you okay? She asked. I almost laughed. I think so. She hesitated. Your brother feels like you embarrassed him. That word. Embarrassed. It rolled around in my head for a second. Did I asked. She didn't answer directly. He thinks you implied he doesn't care about you. I sat down on my couch. I didn't say that. I know. Another pause. He's very careful about security. Security. That word again. I'm not against security, I said. I just don't want to be treated like a future liability. My mom sighed. He loves you. I know. And I did. That was the complicated part. This wasn't a villain story. Ryan wasn't cruel in some cartoon way. He was practical. Structured. He sees life like contracts and contingencies. I see life more like chapters. Sometimes unfinished ones. A few days later, Ryan texted me. Can we reset? Just that. No apology. No explanation. I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote back, we okay? Because in some strange way, we were. Not healed. Not fully understood. But clearer. At the next Sunday dinner, things were different. Subtly. No one brought up school plans in a testing tone. No one joked about figuring life out. Ryan asked me about my classes without smirking. Charlotte asked about my advisor and actually listened. Even her dad, who still made me nervous, didn't comment on ambition. It wasn't warm. But it wasn't sharp either. It felt recalibrated. And that mattered. I also noticed something else. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Not because they changed first. But because I had stopped trying to look acceptable. I talked about my bookstore job without apologizing for it. I mentioned my uneven flaws once and laughed about it. I didn't rush to justify my timeline. That shift was small on the outside. Huge on the inside. Ryan and I still don't talk about the clause. Not directly. It exists. So does the memory of the wedding toast. But something about that dinner, when I put numbers on the table instead of feelings, changed the dynamic. Not dramatically. Just enough. Sometimes I wonder if he signed that prenup thinking he was being responsible. Maybe he was. Maybe if our roles were reversed, I would have done something similar. I don't know. That's the uncomfortable part. Growth doesn't come with perfect clarity. It comes with awkward dinners and unfinished conversations. There are still moments when I feel that old flicker of comparison. When Ryan talks about investments or promotions and I feel behind. But it doesn't swallow me anymore. Because I know where I stand. Not in his contract. In my own life. And that's different. Charlotte and I actually had coffee again last month. No tension this time. She admitted she didn't fully agree with every clause, but family negotiations are complicated. I told her I understood. And I did. I don't hate them. I don't resent them. I just needed them to see me as someone who isn't waiting to be rescued. Or managed. Or factored in. And maybe they needed to see that I see myself that way too. Not everything heals cleanly. Ryan still likes control. I still move at a pace that makes him uncomfortable. But we talk. We show up. We try. And honestly, that's real life. It's not a cinematic apology scene. It's incremental respect. It's fewer jokes at my expense. It's my name not being used as an example. Sometimes that's enough. And sometimes I still think about that wedding toast. The laughter. The chandeliers. The way I felt small. And I realized something. If that hadn't happened. If I hadn't been reduced to a safe comparison, in front of 200 people. I might still be drifting. Not because I lacked ambition. But because I lacked clarity. Humiliation forced me to define myself. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just deliberately. And I think that's why I don't regret speaking up. Even if it made things messy. Even if it made him uncomfortable. Even if part of me still wonders if I overreacted. Because silence would have been easier. And easier isn't always healthier. I'm still figuring things out. That part's true. But now it feels like a choice. Not a label. I still think about that wedding sometimes. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Just, randomly. When I'm washing dishes. When I'm walking to class. When I pass a bridal shop window and see mannequins posed in perfect stillness. I think about how small I felt sitting at that head table. How easy it was for laughter to define me. And how quickly I accepted it. That part is the hardest to admit. Because no one physically forced me to shrink. I did that quietly on my own. I let still figuring it out turn into not worth protecting. I let unfinished chapters feel like flaws instead of just unfinished. And maybe that's why the prenup clause hit so deep. It wasn't just about money. It was about how I saw myself. Or didn't. I've learned something uncomfortable over the past year. People will categorize you if you don't define yourself first. Not always maliciously. Sometimes they're just trying to feel safe. Ryan wanted security. Charlotte's dad wanted predictability. My mom wanted peace. And I wanted to be taken seriously without having to say anything. That last part doesn't work, by the way. I'm still in school now. 2 classes at a time. It's not glamorous. I still work at the bookstore. My apartment floor is still uneven. The fridge still hums too loudly at night. But when I look at my bank app now, I don't open it to prove something. I open it because it's mine. My plan.my timeline. My responsibility. Ryan and I are better. Not perfect. But better. He doesn't make jokes about my direction anymore. I don't flinch when he talks about investments. We just, adults now. With different definitions of security. And I think that's okay. I used to believe that being behind was the worst thing you could be. Behind your peers. Behind your siblings. Behind some invisible life schedule. But I don't think behind is real anymore. There's just movement. And sometimes movement looks quiet. If I'm honest, part of me is grateful for that humiliating toast. Not because it felt good. It didn't. It felt awful. But it forced a moment I would have avoided forever. It forced me to ask myself, if someone reduced your entire future to a risk assessment, would you agree with them? That question changed me. Not overnight. Not in some dramatic glow-up way. Just steadily. It made me sit with my own fears. It made me separate who I am from who I might become. It made me realize that independence isn't about never needing anyone. It's about not assuming you will. There's a difference. And maybe that's the real shift. I don't resent the clause anymore. It exists. It's ink on paper. It says more about their fears than it does about my potential. And that's something I didn't understand at 23. Humiliation can either freeze you, or it can clarify you. I'm glad, even through shaky hands and awkward dinners, that I chose clarity. If you've ever been the sibling who's still figuring it out, or the friend who's almost there, or the quiet comparison at someone else's milestone, I'm curious. Did you shrink? Or did you eventually draw a line? Because sometimes the moment that embarrasses you the most is the moment that hands you a mirror. And you get to decide what stays. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Define yourself before someone else drafts the paperwork.